Good evening.
Good evening.
Right. So, for me, it's only just been a few hours since I recorded that last video. And we've subsequently watched, as you've imagined, the Pandorica opens and the Big Bang. It is called the Big Bang, isn't it, the second one? Anyway. And I've worked out what was wrong, because I'm clever like that. You may well be aware of a programme called The Prisoner. The Prisoner is a very peculiar programme from the 1960s that was created by and starred an actor called Patrick McGoohan. And The Prisoner is one of my all-time favourite programmes. It is a masterpiece. And The Prisoner is something that's been talked about, almost as much as Doctor Who's been talked about. Hardcore Prisoner fans, or Prisoner aficionados, don't believe you should watch all of The Prisoner. Because there are some episodes of The Prisoner, it's a very high concept programme, but there are some episodes of The Prisoner that just don't quite cohere with the wider concept. You're supposed to watch the first episode, and then the one with the computer in, the general, that's called, and then something else, and then you're supposed to watch the two episodes. And so of the however many episodes of The Prisoner, I don't know, 13, you're supposed to watch like 7 of them or something like that. And that is the condensed Prisoner experience. And all the other stuff is good, don't get me wrong, but it's extraneous to the essential story of The Prisoner. And that is what I think I was getting at with my conversation of The Lodger. Because in this new era of Doctor Who, that we've just seen the end of the first season of, the Moffatian era of Doctor Who, we have gone to a place where Doctor Who is as high concept as Doctor Who has ever been, really. Moffat is relying on the fact that the Doctor Who audience, which is a big audience still when this was on the telly, but we've had Bad Wolf and we've had Torchwood and we've had all these overlapping bits and bats. And I think the general idea is that your, I was going to say average, that's not very kind, general audience can cope with that sort of in-depth storytelling. Now, the thing is, when RTD does it, it's not. When RTD does it, it's all emotional story beats happening far more consistently than anything the Doctor Who did before. And then little bits dropped in. So it's not as if there's like big, to coin a phrase, wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey things going on. It's more to the point that, at least in terms of the whole season, you get little clues and hints, but they're just Easter eggs, really. And that's not what happened here. What happened in this season...
I love Easter eggs, by the way.
Sorry?
I love Easter eggs.
Oh, yeah.
Easter.
What happens here is you get something that loops back on itself, wraps around itself, that makes explicit references to other stories. This is something that if you are, I'll use that word again, average viewer, it is very easy to get lost here. And I wonder whether, for the average viewer, and never forget, without the average viewer, Doctor Who dies, okay? You can't do this programme unless you're drawing in some people who don't class themselves as Doctor Who fans, okay? But is this too much? Is there too much going on here for the person who watches the odd episode of Doctor Who?
I don't think so.
Well, I think that some of this is incomprehensible if you've missed bits of the season. Even Humphrey, who knows Doctor Who well, didn't pick up that the scene in the Big Bang that we've already seen however many episodes before was from the time of Angels. And my boy's clever at this sort of thing. There is so much stuff going on here that if you don't know what's happened before, it starts to make very, very little sense. And even when they're confined to these 2 episodes, this is fairly complicated stuff. Now, you may balk at that. You may say, well, it's actually very obvious, Peter, what's going on in this story. But honestly, do you understand every part of this? The way that the timeline is, if is it the timeline, is it now a reality line, has changed itself. She's got parents. So was she up waiting for the Doctor when she was doing fish custard then? And if she wasn't, there's even that line that we talked over that I know is there where Rory goes, am I plastic? Because there's just so many things at the end of this episode which, when you try and rectify them in the entirety of it, doesn't make sense. Why is River there? There's no way that River can exist until the Doctor exists, because we will find out that River's conceived on the TARDIS. So none of that makes sense. No, that doesn't matter.
You're spoiling it for me.
I'm not spoiling it because it's amazing. These 2 episodes are absolutely just, is the word bravura? I don't know. But they're just so fine. And it pays off, that sort of viewing. You know, even the outset where we get what would be, if this was Prisonerville, some of the episodes that you should watch on your way into this episode. Because you don't have to watch Vampires in Venice to get this episode. You don't have to watch The Lodger to get this episode. You don't have to watch 90% of the Silurian one to get this episode. To get this episode, you do have to have watched Vincent. You probably have to have watched...
I don't think you have to watch Vincent.
You do, because it sets you up. And also, you said when we had this conversation earlier that you kind of miss out. That's the emotional beat where she's missing. That is the moment where Amy is legitimately missing Rory. And I think that for the emotional narrative of the programme is important. Maybe not plot-wise, but emotionally, that's essential. Anyway, I just think that what you've got here is one of the all-time TARDIS teams, honestly. Matt Smith, his interpretation of the Doctor is absolutely solid. And I'm going to have this conversation with you people. Is he better than Tennant?
He isn't better than Tennant,
He is better
but
than Tennant.
he is sexier than Tennant. And I feel weird saying that because now watching it, I think he's way too young.
Well, yeah.
Too young for me now, but he wasn't too young.
He wasn't
for me
too young
then,
for us then.
because that was 14 years ago.
Amy, I think, is brilliant, and I know that Lib has her reservations, but Amy as a character, both Amys, Amelia and Amy, are just absolutely phenomenal. That bit at the start of the second episode where the Pandorica opens and it's Amy inside, she said, "Kid, this is going to get complicated," is absolutely class. It is a sin that Arthur Darvill doesn't have his name in the opening credits of the Big Bang, because honestly, Rory is an absolute top-ranked companion. And you know, in the annals of Doctor Who history, when discussing this era, it'll always talk about the Doctor and Amy Pond, and then Rory comes, in the same way that we used to have Dr. Sarah Jane Smith and Harry Sullivan. But what he adds, his performance is just sublime, because he does find himself in a situation where he's playing the clown a lot of the time. But there's moments here, that bit where the Doctor forgets... doesn't notice that Rory's back, or does notice but doesn't clock, is absolutely brilliant. And that bit where he gets cross because the Doctor is testing him to see if he's actually human. And then, he punches him. And that bit where you recognise that he's going to sit around for 2,000 years, and you believe it, because it's Rory doing it. And there's not many characters that could pull that off, and you know he's going to do it, and it's absolutely beautiful. And then into the mix, you throw bloody River Bloody Song, who, quite honestly, could be the Doctor. She is so good that if Matt Smith had took a season off and River Song had come in and it was Professor Who for a season, you would be completely fine with that, because she is just class.
And Winnie and I both agree with that, because we both said it whilst we were watching.
It's and you've got these 4 brilliant performers making this just utterly sublime. Utterly sublime. And then in the midst of that, you've got this absolutely grandstandy episode where we bring all these baddies back, but that's not even the point. And then, of course, it's a Dalek that's the big threat at the end, but it's not really the Dalek who's the threat at the end, but that just demonstrates how heavy it is. You get the return of Amelia Pond. Oh, my goodness. The character you didn't know you wanted back more than anything else. And when she rocks back in that bit, when she's running into the museum, and it's just absolutely brilliant. Yes, it's confusing, and I do feel that the concept is too big for the season. I do feel the concept is too big for the season, and people, we're going to have to talk about this next season. No spoilers. I don't suppose you do know what's coming. But I have some major issues with the next season. And I do think that Moffat, don't shoot me down here, I'm up for people pushing the boundaries of Doctor Who. And I'm more than happy for it to be Stephen Moffat, because he is a genius. But there are places, I think, in his tenure where he pushes too far. Next season has, well, we shall talk about that next season. But there we go. So, genuinely, a fantastic 2 episodes of Doctor Who. we are at the end of this season. Let's do our traditional run through the season. We started with the 11th hour, probably the best first story of any Doctor. I can't, it's just perfect. In introducing a new Doctor, it is absolutely perfect. Then we got The Beast Below, which was an absolute joy to see again because it was way better than I remembered. Victory of the Daleks is flawed, and that is a great shame. But then we get the Weeping Angels episode, and oh my goodness gracious me. If ever there was a set of episodes that we came back to just to do the scene again, it should be those, because that is a masterpiece sat in the middle of the season. Vampires in Venice, which is notable now because Rory comes back, and honestly, Rory is the ingredient that this season needs. And I think when he's there, it just seems a more cohesive team. Not that it isn't already, but you know what I mean. There's just a quality to it. Amy's Choice, as I said at the time, I can't be objective about it. It's too dear an episode to my heart, but I do think it's class. Then the Silurian one, which is good. It's good. But like I say, you don't need to watch that one. You don't need to watch Amy's Choice, to be honest. But you certainly don't need to watch that one because, you know, apart from the TARDIS exploding a bit, it is just a fine episode of Doctor Who. Don't mistake it for the Silurians because it's the same story. Then I think it was Vincent the Doctor again, an absolute masterpiece. And I do think the emotional heart of this season. Libby's ignoring me now. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. The Lodger, I think, honestly, for as lovely an episode as it is, I think is missable. Not because it's not good, but because it's just very slight in comparison to everything that's going on around it, the high concept stuff that's going on, even though we will make reference back to it in the future. And I'm looking forward to drawing the dots there. I mean, it's been fairly forewarned at the end of this story that there's some questions left unanswered. And I do feel that the Pandorica opens and the Big Bang are absolute class, the way it loops back to the 11th hour, the way that it brings characters back in, the way that the weight of it feels, you know, builds up and up and up and up, absolutely class. So, a peculiar experience watching this season again. It doesn't have the emotional cohesion that RTD's era has. And again, I cannot wait for About Time by Tutwood et al. To come out on this particular season because they made some brief reference about mistakes that Moffat made or the production team, more importantly, made. And I'd be intrigued to see what they mean by that. There were some moments, that Vampires in Venice effect was ropey as chuff, and we've not seen anything like that in RTD Who. It would appear that Phil Collinson was a bit of a genius, but we shall talk more about that when he comes back again in a long time. But yeah, really looking forward to the next one because I've not seen it in years. And then I'm really looking forward to the next season. Not necessarily because of the season, but because of the stories within it. But we'll talk about that when we get there. Joyousness. Farewell.